Welcome back to Promising Young Surgeon, where we explore incredible journeys of those in the surgical field, from trainees to trailblazers. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Mei, and today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Sheri Dewan. Dr. Dewan is a highly accomplished neurosurgeon and author of the book Cutting a Path, where she shares her journey of really breaking barriers in a historically male-dominated field, which is neurosurgery. And so before we welcome her onto the show, I do want to, formally introduce our esteemed guest. Dr. Sheri Dewan is a board-certified neurosurgeon. She's the incoming chairwoman of neurosciences at Ascension Health and a clinical professor at the Chicago Medical School. She is one of roughly 200 board-certified female neurosurgeons in the United States. She completed her neurosurgery residency at Brown University and graduate degree at Northwestern University. She's a proud board member of Women in Neurosurgery, Congress of Neurological Surgeons, and American Association of Neurological Surgeons. She donates her time performing charity surgery in southern India and sits on multiple charity foundation boards. She has studied business and finance at the University of Oxford Executive Education Program in London, England. Furthermore, she is trilingual in English, Spanish, and Hindi and has lived in 5 countries. Dr. Dewan, first of all, can I say that, I want to be you when I grow up, and I really appreciate you being here with us today.
It's funny, after hearing that introduction, I'm like, is that about me? No, no, I'm happy to be here, and I love sharing my story about my path in neurosurgery to really help inspire and encourage the next generation, through the trials and tribulations that I experienced. And really to show people that they're capable of so much more than they believe themselves to be.
I love that. Well, I want to dive right in here. In your book, Cutting a Path, you did share how you first started your passion for neurosurgery and kind of like the early years of your journey. But I'd love to hear what led you to pursue neurosurgery specifically and really what brought you to medicine altogether.
Yeah, I was a kid who really loved the library. I really started loving books and literature. And as I got older, I would start reading books about neuroscience and the brain. And I was just fascinated by every aspect of it. And then it kind of went into medicine. It went into wanting to help people, wanting to make big changes in people's lives. I would always look at my parents' medicine cabinet and look at all the medicine and try to understand what each one was for. And so really I was, a kid that enjoyed reading books, knowledge. And then, as time went on, I started involving myself in anything I could, whether it was shadowing a family friend who was a physician in the operating room or, shadowing in the clinic and being around doctors and volunteering at hospitals, but the passion for neuroscience came at a young age. And then,
Amazing.
I think the pivotal moment, that I write about in my book is really when my mother became ill. And, at the age of 49, she had a ruptured brain aneurysm and it was a life-threatening condition. She was taken to the hospital. And that's when I met a neurosurgeon for the first time who ended up clipping her aneurysm and saving her life. So I felt that that was going to be my path.
Wow, that is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that your mom had, a good outcome from such a dangerous condition. How old were you when that happened?
I was in my early 20s. And, at that point, kind of finding my way in the world and, meeting this incredible neurosurgeon who, really didn't know me. He didn't know my family. He knew nothing about us. And, he had the skills and the knowledge to help us and to save her life. And I found that to be such an incredible gift that he gave us. And I wanted to do that for other people, whether it was wives or mothers or sisters or brothers and family members. And I felt that if I could train myself to do that and to have that skill level, I could do that for other people.
That's so incredible. And yes, certainly it sounds like it was very formative, that experience in the hospital and meeting your first neurosurgeon. I think that one thing that I hear a lot from like the younger generation, especially when they are at the decision-making level of maybe pre-med or like in medical school, people talk a lot about that first time in the operating room. And what was that like for you? You mentioned in like a shadowing capacity, going to the OR the first time.
Yeah, so I had an opportunity when I was about 14, 15, somewhere in that range, that a family friend was a surgeon and an OB-GYN, and they were actually doing an IVF procedure. And he asked if I wanted to come into the operating room. So I did. It was downtown Chicago, Northwestern, and it was the first time I ever put scrubs on. And, the whole kind of intake of it, whether it was going in and seeing the nursing team or the patient and all of these other pieces of the puzzle. I mean, I remember being really nervous, and then, wanting to make sure I didn't touch anything that I wasn't supposed to. And, being a rule follower myself to some degree, everything blue is sterile and everything like that. But I remember just being so fascinated by the teamwork. Everybody had a role. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. And so, it was really one of my pivotal formative experiences of being in the OR at that age.
Yes, that is very young. That's impressive. Like, honestly, kudos to you, 14, 15. That, it sounds like perhaps you have a pretty good iron stomach for this kind of stuff. I do want to share, I'm an ENT and I practice full time still. And when I was first exposed to really any like more invasive procedure, I think I was about 18 or so, maybe 18, 19. And I was shadowing a hemonc, an incredible doctor, really a phenomenal role model. And I loved his clinical acumen. I loved following him around the office. And then it came time for this core needle biopsy. And I was like not excited to see needles. And I was not ready for the size of that needle. Passed out immediately, like almost me, and this poor girl, like she should have been more scared than me, but I do not think that she was, for the patient herself. But I did pass out, and then, just kind of my corpse got dragged into the hallway by a nurse, and then they brought me orange juice. But honestly, I do share that just to give even like two sides of the coin, because
Absolutely.
it did not prevent me from becoming a surgeon. And sometimes when you're young, you think, okay, this is the end. Like that was a career ender. Like it's not, and it's actually not uncommon for some of us to have that kind of a reaction when we are still in the process of desensitizing to this environment.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And there's actually a story I wrote about in the book about how I was clipping a brain aneurysm and a medical student passed out in the room as I was putting the clip on. And it happens, and people vasovagal, or it's an early morning, or maybe you didn't get breakfast, or, or maybe you just got really nervous. I mean, so it's definitely not a career ender. I mean, I've definitely felt ill in the operating room. I've felt sick. We've all done it. And, but I think the key is to get back on that horse and keep on riding, and try it again. And so no, I'm glad that you shared that story. That was really great.
No, I love that. And to your point, I mean, there are things like not only do you get back on the horse, but it's like you can probably prepare better. And that does involve maybe making sure that you have had a solid breakfast or lunch that day, visualization techniques. Those are very real, just kind of superpowers that you have control over that can help you prepare.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So at what point in your journey did you feel like it was definitely going to be neurosurgery? I know that a lot of us go into medical school already with our heart set on one thing. And certainly I went in thinking, I love ENT. I had experience that made me feel that way. But of course, I still explored a couple options and waffled during medical school itself. Like, what was that portion of the journey like for you?
Yeah, because I love neuroscience so much, it was kind of like, is this going to be neurosurgery or is it going to be neurology?
Awesome.
And I vacillated between the two for a really long time. But what it really came down to was like, I just didn't enjoy neurology enough. I just didn't feel like I could offer to the patients substantive treatments and therapeutics that I could do. And what I always loved about the OR is just the procedural aspect. I could fix somebody with my hands. I could be, I could be kind of in the thick of it. And I think the point really came for me as a third year med student. And I was, dating my husband now, whose name is Alex. And I was really worried about choosing neurosurgery as a woman. We were going to get married. I wanted to have kids. So I was kind of petrified about this possibility of, what does this look like, as a neurosurgeon? Am I going to have a happy marriage? Am I going to be able to have children? Am I going to have good quality of life? And, one thing Alex said to me was, I want you to do what you want to do, because in 10 years, I don't want you to look back and say, I want a do-over, or I wish I could have done it. And so that's really when I made the decision to say, that's it. I'm not even going to try for neurology programs. I'm going gung-ho, full steam ahead with neurosurgery. I had no backup. And I just put my application together, put it out. I was the only one that matched in neurosurgery in my year.
Wow.
From medical school, from that program. And, you don't know how competitive you are, because everyone's great, right? So, what's going to make you stand out? And there's a chapter in my book where I talk about my residency interview at Brown University, which is where I ended up going for residency. And when I showed up, there was 40 candidates for one spot. And that was their first interview day of 2. There was actually 80 candidates for one spot. So you figure the stakes are so high, and what were my chances, right? And, but I feel like, I was always passionate about it. I always wanted to work really hard and be the best I could be. And I never wanted to regret not doing something that I could have done or could have challenged myself to do. So I think that was really my decider, was trying to project myself into the future and saying to myself, am I going to regret in a decade that I didn't do this? And the answer for me was yes, I would regret if I didn't take the leap. So that was really the decider for me. And the stars aligned. I found a great program. It wasn't easy. I mean, I write about it in the book, lots of trials and tribulations of getting through it. But, I've been in practice now for 14 years, and I have no regrets about choosing the path.
Right. That's incredible. And, one of the major themes that you explore in your book is gender inequality. Certainly in medicine, in neurosurgery specifically, which is predominantly male. And I would be interested to hear at which point along your journey that you really felt that for the first time, where you noticed it. Because honestly, and I'm a fellow library kid, the library doesn't care if you're a young woman or a young man. Even in my very STEM heavy education early on, I'm not sure I even felt it in college. I've been a girl the whole time, but I can definitely think of more of a specific point along the medical journey where I became acutely aware of it, and I saw being treated differently because of it. So what was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the moment that I really realized that there was discrimination was when I was on an interview. And I had gone to an interview for neurosurgery. It was a very high-powered university. And the senior neurosurgeon, who I deeply respected and admired and had put on a pedestal, sat with me in his office. And he's going through my application. And he's like, oh, your board scores are great. Letters of recommendation are great. Everything's great. And he's just flipping through the pages very casually. Almost like we were having a conversation at dinner versus, me talking about the program and what I would accomplish there and what, I hope to bring to the table. And at some point, he just closed my application and said, neurosurgery is really only for white males, and showed me the door. And, here I am, I'm 27 years old. My mom has been through this horrific tragedy. We're just starting to recover from it. I'm just getting back in the saddle and going to medical school, finally getting everything together. and, devoting so much of my life, my young life, and I think that's one thing young doctors have to understand is that we're so young at this point, that we have devoted so much of our careers. And, at that point, I didn't really know what to say, what to do. I never reported him. I was terrified of being blacklisted in the neurosurgical community and not getting any interviews. He's still a full professor. He's still working at his position. And, you wonder how many people he said this to along the way and how many dreams he shattered. For me, it was, this person's in my way. I have a goal and he's preventing me from getting my goal. So instead of using or viewing myself as somehow less than, it was more that I needed to find a way around him to get what I wanted. And that's the mentality I went with. And so I didn't rank the program. And I happened to get, 18 interviews for a neurosurgery residency, and I did all of them. And, but I didn't rank the program because I didn't feel it was the place, that I wanted to spend my time, my 7 years of training.
Oh, I can't imagine, training under somebody who believes that to be true or, holds that philosophy and is in a position of power over all of the trainees. Certainly. It is abhorrent. Like, I appreciate, of course, every one of the stories that you share from along your journey definitely helps the next generation. May I ask, was his program all white men at the time, of even saying that?
At the time, the program was all white. There was a woman.
Yeah. I don't envy her at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think in neurosurgery, it's kind of unspoken sometimes. We knew which programs not to apply. You just knew. They hadn't taken women residents. Now things are a little bit different. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in neurosurgery. Women are 6% of the field. So there's a couple hundred of us that are neurosurgeons, board certified. Now there's about 20% female residents. So the hope is that over time, eventually we'll have the number up to maybe 12% or 15%. But it's still such a minority, compared to the numbers for men.
Yep. And that, I have looked at the numbers across the surgical subspecialties, and certainly, yes, neurosurgery even lags behind, because certainly ENT is male dominated, but our numbers are a little bit more favorable than that. One thing that I think of course, I know that this was a long time ago, like this didn't happen yesterday, and the tincture of time is all very real. But of course, I love how you come from this very healed place, and you talk about, like, even at the time, it wasn't about that guy. You said, no worries. I'll go around you, I'll work around this, whatever you're bringing to the table. That's not what I'm looking for. I'll work around it. And I definitely do. I think that a lot of us, especially women in medicine, have moments like that, like versions of that guy. And of course, if those are the types of things that he is saying out loud, then it's even scarier to think of kind of unspoken implications, like at that program or within that culture. But what I love, and I even say this because, like, this is not my strong suit, I'm trying to definitely grow, is that a lot of us can harbor like some feelings about those interactions where we're like, one day, maybe they'll see, or they'll come around, or maybe they'll see me differently, or maybe really respect me or view me the way that I hope to earn to be viewed. And what's so funny is I think of this old proverb, which is, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just because even as you were telling this story, it's like, everything that you've done with your career, everything that you've put out into the world, like not only the lives you save, the patients that you care for, their families who receive great care because of what you do for your patients, and then everything that you do outside of the hospital, artistically, creatively, it's just like, it's beyond incredible. And so it's cool to think of maybe that person like coming around and they're like, wow, I mean, literally you have one of the most like singular, extraordinary careers. I think that it has changed, it's changing the world. Like, this is really amazing. So that guy should take notice. But it's so funny because I could see a version of it where that guy doesn't even remember, right? The axe forgets, but the tree remembers.
Yeah. And I'm sure that, and it's not about, the thing is, it's not about him, right? Because there are other versions of him out there in other scenarios. It's really more emblematic, and I think, points to the fact that sometimes it can be subtle, but sometimes it can be blatant and it's in your face, and so how you handle it and what your goals are. And again, I mean, if I had decided at that moment, I'm not going to be a neurosurgeon because of this guy, think about like all of the people, that butterfly effect, all the patients that I've taken care of, all the families, my own mother, all these people have that downstream effect. And so, it was not going to be, it's not his career, right? It's my career and it's my life. And so I took ownership of that. And I also had a very strong support system. I have Alex, my husband, who's always been kind of a rock and the voice of reason, and I have my parents who I'm very close to. I have my sister who I'm very close to. So I have all these people in my corner who are like, no, that's not right. And I don't think they would have let me walk away from that type of career, over something someone said.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I'm glad that you had that. Some people don't have as strong of support systems, and I do think that what's tough about medicine is a lot of us are extremely young and impressionable when we get on that conveyor belt. And so, I mean, and in your early 20s, right? Like, not a lot of us don't know who we are, and when you don't know who you are, it's a lot easier for other people to tell you, right? So even comments like these from major authority figures. So I think it sets such a great example that you didn't even consider, letting it waylay you. It's like you had a clear vision, you knew who you were. I think that one of the takeaways is just that two people who are in their 20s or, a lot of us in our 30s, it's like, it's important work to know who you are and kind of be clear on it, right? Because then you don't get bogged down in out-of-pocket comments such as this one.
Definitely. I think knowing who you are, and then at some point you get into your 40s and then you stop caring, and that when you reach that, I mean, that is a different level of freedom, because at that point in your career, you really don't care what people say because you truly know who you are to the very depths. And so, I will say that is a level of freedom that I think has been really wonderful at this point in my career.
I love that. But, and I love that. I think that that's what a lot of us like dream of and work towards and really want is like freedom from other people's opinions. Being one of the really big aspects of that.
Yeah.
But one of the really powerful sections of your book, you do talk about feeling isolated during training. And so I would just love to hear about, because especially for a person like you, very clear vision, very clear goals, has extraordinary meaning behind like your calling and what you've pursued. Had you ever thought about leaving the field, or changing tack?
Yeah. I mean, I think the world of residency and med school is so different now compared to, when I did it in many ways too, because honestly, social media. I mean, when I was pregnant with my child, my first child in residency, I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know there was anybody like me. Now you can look on social media and you can see a pregnant female resident from across the country showing that she's in the OR and doing great things. And you have that camaraderie and you can reach out to those people and have those relationships. And, this is back before any of that was done or existed. And so there was a lot of isolation. And I think most of it came when I had just, made the decision to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And, like most surgical residencies, it was not a popular decision. And, many people were like, there's no such thing as a good mother and a good neurosurgeon. I can't believe you're doing this. And, it was very hard to, at that point, accept that bringing a child into the world was a negative, which is the way that it was viewed. My husband's work, he was a PhD and he was working in a lab, research lab as a biochemist. And, his lab was over the moon. I mean, they were throwing me baby showers and they were, and it was a totally different experience at my work. It was oh no, how much of your call are we going to have to take, or how long are you going to be out for? And it was all of a very negative type of feel. And so, it's no surprise that, one of the times I thought about actually leaving neurosurgery was actually when I was pregnant. And, it was a scenario where I was massively pregnant and I was just trying to get through the day, waddling around, bumping into things and still really trying to operate, still trying to do my best, dealing with morning sickness, dealing with all of the things that women go through. And, I had been at a grand rounds and there was a case that was being discussed at grand rounds. And one of the attendings who had been very clear about his displeasure at my pregnancy, kind of began like a verbal attack during that grand rounds. And at the end of it, I thought, that's it. Like I'm done. I've done enough. And at this point, I'm a 6th year resident, right? So I only have one more year to go, like a year and a half. Like I was so close to the end. But it was just so demoralizing. And, you add in the pregnancy hormones, you add in, all of the factors that come in. And I had decided that night that was it. I was done with neurosurgery. I was going to quit. And, later on that evening, after talking to my family and talking to Alex and everyone, I just remember thinking, look at all of these neurosurgeons that have come before me, like Harvey Cushing, who's like the godfather of neurosurgery, or Sophia Ionescu, who's the first woman neurosurgeon. And you look at all these neurosurgeons, or think about Dr. Johnson, who operated on my mother. If they had thrown in the towel or quit, like where would we be as a society, right? Like, because, think about the first astronauts. Like, what if they got scared, chickened out, threw in the towel? Like, where would we be in the space race? And so I really sat down and I thought about it, and I thought, like, look what I'm doing for other women. Like the fact that I could someday get up to the position that I'm at now, which is chair, and be able to really affect change in neurosurgery and hire other women and recruit. And so I made a decision at that point that I was not going to quit and I was going to stay invested. And I did, and I graduated on time. It was not easy. Things got better. I had my daughter. I had at that point 2 healthy kids. So there's so many blessings in it, and I think if life was linear, I think it wouldn't be a learning experience for us, right? It would be boring. It would be easy. And so I think the ups and downs of life are part of living it and experiencing it. And so, I'm grateful that I've had the hard times, and I'm grateful I've had the bad times, because I know what the really good times look like. And I would encourage anybody going through similar experiences of any kind to really, do what they call go to the balcony, which is when you go to a spot where you can look at something from far away and you can really visualize everything that's going to happen in that path if you take a step back and a step higher. So go to the balcony, so to speak, and look down and really think about it from a non-emotional place.
That's very moving. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I definitely, that's great. I got to add that to my vocabulary and also to my practice, not only mindfulness practice, but maybe some of this big picture planning that we all have to do.
Absolutely.
Well, it's so funny because, one of the things I did want to ask you today was about like your resilience, where it comes from, what you draw on, but you have already alluded a bit to your family, your strong support system. And then even just now, I mean, really like at this very deep level, alluded to ancestors in neurosurgery, the historic figures. But I'd love to hear what you view as your biggest sources of power that you draw on for your resilience, in ways that all of us can like learn from you and implement great practices for ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've always been one of these people that practices meditation. I've been doing it for many, many years. When I was almost 15, I learned how to meditate from this yogi in India. I was visiting my grandmother for a summer. And, what he was really teaching me was meditation visualization techniques at that age, and kind of teaching me about finding goals and looking at them from far away, and thinking about how you want your life to transpire over periods of time. And so kind of gave me, at a younger age, a look at, what are my goals and how do I view them? And so the mindfulness, yes, but the meditation, the visualization, the actualization of your goals. And I'll also say I'm very organized when it comes to goal planning. I keep a list of all my goals for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And in residency, they used to have us do this, goals and objectives. Every year we would write down, what are our goals and objectives for the year? And it could be anything. It could be, I want to learn how to do this operation, or I want to get the 90th percentile on my boards, or whatever they were. And I think the act of writing them down is so important. And so what I started to do as I got older was I have, my professional goals, my personal goals, and then my family goals. And they're kind of in these three buckets. And so I continuously check in with these three buckets and I say, okay, am I meeting these goals? I mean, last year the goal was I want to learn how to ski, and so, those are the goals. And so you kind of have to say to yourself, well, have I hit this goal? And I think that that's kept me really organized. I have three kids. One of my big goals for them is getting them where they want to go in life. So
Right.
I feel very fortunate. I've gotten to where I want to be in life. And my goal is to get them there. So, I think everything is very deliberate in many ways. And then there's also time for spontaneity. There's also time for fun. There's also time for humor. And I think those are the things that I've drawn on that have kept me, grounded. In neurosurgery, it's really hard if people don't have that grounding. I've seen people go off on a lot of different tangents that aren't healthy. And so I feel fortunate that I've had not only, the backing of the support structure of my family and my husband, but also, a good understanding of who I am and what my goals are, and really what I want to put out in the universe for other people, which is where the books and all that came into play.
It's so incredible. I mean, what I'm really hearing and just like in awe of, you are so intentional with your time, and with where your energy goes. Like, even as doctors, I mean, they don't formally teach that, there are mid and late career doctors who don't necessarily have that, just because none of us are ever required to sit down and know ourselves in that way and then like basically put in the work, because it does take a little bit of work up front to be that organized and that intentional. So I just really admire it. I definitely will echo that. In my experience, I made a vision board for the first time New Year's of 2024. So that's this year. And this has been one of my most kind of intentional, productive years, I think. And I look forward to, for New Year's Eve, New Year's of 2024, 25, doing it again. Cause now I'm like, okay, all right. You crazy kooks, like you were right about vision boarding and, making these lists and having a vision, because I just found suddenly that there was a much higher return of the things that I wanted out of life after I sat down and really took stock and made myself do that practice of the
Yeah.
things that I wanted from life.
Yeah. And I think there's also, the universe works in really funny ways. And I think when you put out to the universe what your desires are, I think sometimes you manifest things that maybe perhaps wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so I'm a big believer in that too, is throwing out those wishes to the universe and manifesting those goals. And shockingly, sometimes they come true in a way that you never expected, and so, like I said, I'm a big believer in that too. And maybe that's a little bit of luck,
Mhm.
wishful thinking, luck, what have you. But definitely putting out those manifestations into the universe, I think it's been helpful, at least for me, in certain aspects.
Yes, and I'm such a quote person, but I think of the mantra, you get in life what you have the courage to ask for,
Yeah, definitely.
So to kind of shift a little bit, but kind of in the same vein, surgeons, we can be so filled with idiosyncrasies. Sometimes a lot of us are superstitious, and I include myself in that very much. Like, for instance, when we're talking on-call routines, like when I was a resident, one of my seniors, he had a specific on-call routine, and so if I was on call with him, I'd be basically following him around the hospital, and he would have a bowl of cereal every late afternoon, like if he was going to be on call that night. And so, I basically ended up joining in that practice with him because I was on call with him a lot. Um, do you have any particular kind of on call routines, specific things that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think surgeons in general want a certain amount of equilibrium. Like, we don't like when things are off kilter or, out of place. And maybe that speaks a little bit to like our OCD nature. But for me, the way that I always center myself is before I do a really big case, I'll go into my office, I'll close the door, and I'll turn off the phone. And I will just take about 5 minutes and I will go through every step of the procedure, from the positioning of the patient to the incision that I make, to the actual procedure, to the closure, to the post-op. And I'll go through all the steps in my head very quickly so that when I walk in the room, I am calm, I am collected, I am not all over the place, because as you know, there's 6 to 8 people in the room and everyone's asking you questions. And so I do my best to try to get myself centered so that what I project to the operating room staff and what I project to the patients and their families is that I've got it together. And so that's really helped me throughout my career. I'm also a big believer in green tea. I drink a lot of it and kind of throughout the day. So it helps to keep my energy up without giving me the coffee crash. So
Hmm.
green tea is a huge part of my day. I think that, and just that visualization, meditation before big cases, that's all been very helpful for me.
That's awesome. I'm definitely a tea person myself. We have a little tea bar at home, so I'm with you there. So to piggyback off of what you're saying, because doing the visualization practice pre-op, that's awesome. I definitely haven't seen that modeled for me. Like, that sounds like it would make a huge difference in somebody's headspace when they're walking into the OR, and then consequently the energy that they're bringing into the room. But when I think of, pearls that I've learned over the course of my practice, one that I really like is that, of course, both of us respond to emergencies, which does mean at times like we do airway emergencies. And so there's this like temptation to sprint to it.
Mm.
And I totally get that. And I have personally succumbed to that temptation before, but it actually, ultimately, and a lot of the advice from experts, people who've been doing airway emergencies a lot longer than I have, it's to never run, actually. You can walk briskly, you can obviously walk very deliberately in the direction of the emergency, but there's a big difference between somebody, the surgeon, showing up just out of breath, huffing and puffing, like sweating, doubled over. Right now they're walking into this room that they're potentially going to be obtaining a surgical airway or something like that. Like that projects a very different vibe than the person who walks briskly. They stay collected the whole time walking. Certainly we're planning as we're walking, and then you arrive there, and again, you're not like this panting mess.
Right, right. And I think presence says a lot. I mean, we're surgeons in neurosurgery, it's high stakes. We're taking out brain tumors, we're in people's spines, we're, clipping aneurysms. And I think, if you falter and you project that you're frazzled, that's how the operating room is going to feel, and they're going to pick up on those vibes. So I try to be as calm as I possibly can be, even when we're in the face of, a really difficult surgery or something's bleeding or, so I've tried to, I've actually worn a heart monitor during an operation. It was for a trial. It was a company that was trialing heart monitors, and it actually showed that my heart rate did not raise kind of from the minute I walked into the operating room to the minute I walked out. So
Wow.
stayed like a normal. So you could actually track your own. I mean, you could do it with an Apple Watch, but you could actually track yourself, to see. But anyway, it was kind of interesting technology that I thought was kind of out there, because the company was actually looking to see if surgeons in the face of something difficult, elevated their heart rate and how that affected our vitals. So, but interesting stuff for sure.
Absolutely. Well, along your course of your career, did you have any specific female role models in the field or outside of the field who you really drew on for inspiration? I mean, you alluded to the first female neurosurgeon.
Yeah, there were definitely women that I really looked up to. One of them was Dr. Marasco. She did the foreword for my book. So Dr. Corinne Marasco, she was the first woman neurosurgery chair in Michigan in Ann Arbor. And she herself suffers from spina bifida. So she actually operates in a wheelchair. And I gained a lot of strength from just her story. I didn't work directly with her, but through the years working with women in neurosurgery, I'd always seen Dr. Marasco and really respected her. And so when the time came to find someone to write my foreword, I couldn't think of a better person but her. And her response to me was just classic. I'd asked her at a conference, Dr. Marasco, would you be willing to write the foreword for my book, Cutting a Path? And she was like, I'd be happy to. I'd love to read it and give you feedback and everything. And then she said, well, if I can write Sanjay's, I can write yours, because Sanjay Gupta was her resident. So I loved her. I loved her response with that. It was very sweet, but she did a wonderful job, and she's actually a writer herself. So I'm really excited to read maybe perhaps her memoir that comes out someday.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'd be very interested in that as well. And this last question that I want to ask before we, start to make our closing remarks, it's actually about the current state of neurosurgery applications today. I think that there's a lot of talk about the medical student research arms race. And one of the areas that it really impacts is the neurosurgery applicant. And, do you have any particular opinions on that? Do you think that there's a best path forward in terms of how we manage like the publications arm race and assessing potential trainees?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be, and I think it still is, you need a paper to match a neurosurgery was really what the adage was. And if you have a first author, even better, you're going to end up where you want to end up. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, it's not a reality for whatever reasons. Maybe they don't have access to research facilities, or maybe there's a long line of other students that are taking that spot. I mean, so I think even though, but even a clinical paper is possible, and you could do a case report, you could do anything. So I think outside the box when it comes to that. I think, unfortunately, it is a reality that research is, especially for neurosurgery, a requirement for matching. But I think get creative, find an attending that you want to work with, write up a case report, get it published. Now you've got a publication, and put that on your application. So the stakes are so high now for some of these programs. And I probably never would have matched in neurosurgery if I was applying today because the stakes are just so high, and everyone has to be so well-rounded. But unfortunately, I think research is something that is really going to be looked at.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked to some, students who feel like 20 publications are going to be required of them to be super, super competitive. But it's so interesting because what it's causing is this effect of like just trying to get quantity over quality, really. So I do wonder if maybe in the future they're going to cap the number of publications that you can maybe like put on your resume. And that way, instead of like 25 kind of super low quality publications, you have to curate or pick a dozen strong ones or something like that. But it is interesting, and I'm with you. But it's so funny how that happens generationally, because when I was applying in ENT, the residents that I knew told me I never would have matched today. And I feel that way now about the next generation. Like you said, it's like the stakes do get higher every year.
Yeah, they really do. They really do. I mean, the times that I've sat on admissions committees, I'm blown away by, what's coming in through the door. But that just means that we're going to have this incredible generation of doctors that's going to be taking care of us when it's going to be our time, to be in the hospital. So that's what that means. So I guess it's not a bad thing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to close with, an extremely exciting topic, which is just that your book, so again, Cutting a Path, it's been optioned for a television series. So can you share any more about that and the process with us?
Yeah. So, it's funny how the universe works, because sometimes it puts people together. And I ended up meeting two producers from Hollywood who were at a conference that I was attending. And we just kind of bumped into each other and started talking. And one thing led to another. And they said, "Oh, we heard you wrote a book." And so anyway, I got them copies of the book and they read it and they loved it. So we have been optioned for a TV series. So it's the hope is it would be a little bit like House MD. So the character is Dr. Dewan, who would be me, although I will not be in the television show. I will do a cameo, but I will not be the actual actress. So I have asked them, they know who I want to play me, but in any case, so that's been really exciting and really kind of a turn that I never really anticipated. And this is, back to what the universe does. How these things just sometimes materialize. And then even more exciting, there is a children's book that I've been writing for several years with my kids, actually. And the producers are also optioning that for a feature film. So that'll be an animated film. So these two projects are kind of happening simultaneously. Both I've been working on for over a decade, which kind of goes back to this vision. Nights, weekends, holidays, when I'm banging away on my computer, getting these books written, did I know that they were going to be successful? No. They were just passion projects and things that I found creative and interesting. And, I'm really glad that I put the work in and the time in because, now they've come to fruition. And, like I said, it took 10 years. It wasn't the blink of an eye. I didn't wake up one morning and say, "Oh, I guess what, I'm executive producer on a movie." I mean, it didn't happen that way. It just, it took, again, discipline, persistence, a dream, and a little bit of luck.
Sincerely, congratulations, because these are enormous accomplishments, all during your career as a neurosurgeon notwithstanding. And I love your message, your takeaway message. And it reminds me of the quote, 10 years of timing, perseverance, and hard work will make you look like an overnight success.
There you go.
Which is a good reminder, I think, for all of us. And so thank you again for sharing your story and all of your wisdom with us today. It's been genuinely an honor to hear about kind of your perspective, the process, and the impact that you've made both in and out of neurosurgery. For those listening, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Dr. Dewan's book, Cutting a Path, and her children's book, Sita. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
You can connect with me on my website. So it's very easy. It's www.drsheridewan.com. And there's a link, a media link, if anybody, wants to reach out and say hello or tell me about their story. You can also buy the book on that website as well.
Perfect. And we'll have that in our show notes below. Follow me on Instagram at francesmei.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that we can most effectively navigate the game of residency. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Promising Young Surgeon. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries and cutting your own path. If you'd like to submit any questions for future episodes, email me at pys@heyinfluent.com.